Welcome to St. Basil's Parish, home of Conversations for Our Times. We're happy that you've been able to join us for this important conversation with Carol Off. We in Ottawa acknowledge that we are in the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We honor their ongoing relationship with this land and offer respect to the Algonquin First Nation, elders past, present, and future, as we commit to growing in respect and reconciliation and understanding. First up, we're going to find out how all of us can participate in this conversation. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So at the bottom of your screen, there are two buttons that you have a choice of using. One says chat and the other says Q&A. If you press the chat icon, you can put your question in and everybody gets to see the question that you have asked. If you decide, well, I think I want to be a bit more personal than that, then you press the Q&A button and you ask the question there, you type them out. And that question will only be heard by the people who are speaking today, obviously Carol Off, Elizabeth, and myself. But we want to get it through as many questions as we possibly can. So this is where I turn to Dan Basil, whose duty today is to introduce our guest. Dan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Basil, and I've been asked to introduce today's honored guest and author, Carol Off. I thought, why me? I don't personally know Carol, and I've never met her. But after some thought, I agreed to do it. So why should I do this? Well, although we've never met, I feel that I kind of know Carol somewhat. And why is that? Well, because the topics that she writes about are close to my heart and are in line with the work that I had been involved with over a period of 35 years. I served in the Canadian military for 13 years, then transferred to the RCMP for a further 23 years. So as you see, I do have concerns about our world and the direction some of our world leaders seem to be taking it. Things that I thought I was protecting, such as democracy and freedom, now seem to have a different connotation and look as though they may be slipping away. International correspondents such as Carol actually risked their lives to keep Canadians abreast as to just what our military is involved with and doing in war zones. Carol co-authored the award-winning CBC show, co-hosted the award-winning CBC show, As It Happens, for about 16 years. She is the winner of the British Columbia National Award for Nonfiction. She has also received the Gemini Award. Carol has a way of getting across to us the power of words. She shows how these words are being used to suit political agendas. Carol has always loved reading and writing, and it's not surprising that she has a degree from the University of Western Ontario in English literature. In her book, At a Loss for Words, Conversation in an Age of Rage, Carol is giving us clarity as to what is happening on the political scene all over the world. She focuses on 6 words: democracy, freedom, truth, woke, choice, and taxes. She wants us all to understand that something different is going on in politics, thus the term age of rage. So let's listen intensely for Carol's insights and analysis of honest communication and integrity in this age of rage and misinformation. Please welcome this insightful author, Carol Off. Thank you.
You have to unmute me. Oh, there you go. Okay. Thank you. I was muted in Ottawa, and here I am in Toronto. So thank you, Ottawa, for unmuting me. And thanks, Dan, for that great introduction. That was quite lovely. And for all of you, the people in the room listening to this and watching this can't see that there are about half a dozen heads at the top of my screen of the people who organized this event. And I just think that they've done a great job. First of all, because they got me here, and because it's been so well organized. So I'm really happy to be able to talk to all of you today, and thank you, Elizabeth, as well, and Kevin, and Teresa, for making this happen. As Dan was just saying, the book I've written is about words, and it's at a loss for words, as you probably maybe hopefully purchased. What I'm going to do is read sections of it that are maybe familiar to you if you've already read it, but also I think we'll open this up for the questions I know are going to be asked at the end of this. And so I'm going to read a few passages and see how you do. Okay, so I'm going to start off reading a bit from the introduction to this book. And this is, you have to just to bear in mind one important thing, that this book was published in September of 2024. And at the time, Donald Trump had not been reelected. That was a month or 2 months later that would happen. And the other thing was that I didn't expect that things would come to pass as they did. In fact, I was quite surprised when they did. I thought this book would last for maybe a couple of months and then be dead in the water because there'd be no reason for it, no need for it, because Donald Trump surely couldn't win. So I wrote a speculative book to suggest what might happen. And I often went off to the deep end thinking, oh my gosh, this can't possibly happen. I'm just going to warn people of the possibility. Unfortunately, I was successful in this book, and that what I wrote actually came to pass. And what even my diarist predictions have come true. And I would like to say that that's great because I sold a lot of books because of that, but this is not something that makes me happy. I've often said that journalists have their best moments when everybody else is having their worst ones. And this is certainly one of those examples. So I'm going to read you a bit of the introduction. The British author Robert Macfarlane taught me that words are key to our ability to imagine our world and to embrace its possibilities. Macfarlane discovered that the Oxford Junior Dictionary had dropped words from nature, dandelion, willow, otter, newt, and replaced them with words from the realm of technology, such as blog, voicemail, attachment, and broadband. Macfarlane worried that if children no longer knew the exact word for these animals and plants, then the species themselves wouldn't find a place in their imaginations. To name something, he told me in an interview, is to know it a little better, to see it a little more clearly, and maybe to care for it a bit more. He wrote The Lost Words, a spell book, as a lament for the endangered vernacular of the natural world. I believe the same thing is happening to political vocabulary, though with a twist. We keep the word, but the idea it represents is lost. Words that we rely on to define and defend our civil society are either put to work for a different ideological agenda or gutted of their meanings, the values they once stood for, mocked and distorted. We are rapidly losing key language. As with nature, if we no longer have the words, we no longer have what they stand for. When we lack a way to express an idea, then the idea itself may be gone. Even the range of our thoughts becomes diminished. I began to imagine this book in 2020, at a time when a decade of political differences within Canada, the United States, and a number of other democracies was widening into fissures that would soon be impossible to close. As the host of As It Happens, I was alarmed by the strident language of many of our political conversations. Guests often became angry, irrational, and accusatory. They didn't just disagree with one another, they hated those with whom they disagreed. The show's producers had always been able to find reasonable voices spanning most of the ideological spectrum, but not anymore. In all my years of journalism, I had never seen anything like it. We had become incapable of talking to each other. The language we once shared had been co-opted by extremists, and we were reduced to barking and snapping. It's not just that we disputed what path to take. We no longer agreed on the meanings of the words that defined our destination. I'm not saying we should be of one collective mind about anything, but surely we need the vocabulary to coherently disagree, to negotiate our way to some rational understanding with reasonable people on all sides. Without an embrace of a shared and logical discourse, we can't even agree on the facts. Without facts, we can't hope to conclude what is true. And without truth, we've lost trust. This is not a good position to be in as the planet burns. That's part of the introduction. And as Dan was saying, each chapter is actually a word that, of the many I could have chosen, but I found 6 that I thought I could tell the story of the word, because each of these words has a story, a history, a meaning, and a resonance in our lives, in our civil society. And so I chose the words freedom, democracy, woke, choice, truth, and taxes. And actually taxes, I will say, taxes I think seems like an odd choice, but it's actually the most important word, because what I do in the taxes chapter is I show the danger we now face where people think that the obligations they should have to others, the obligations to take care of each other, to find out what's needed of us in our communities, and to pay our way, to pay in advance for a civil society that matters to, I think, most of the people in the room that I'm now speaking to. So taxes to me was the most important chapter for that reason. But the chapter that's dearest to my heart, the one that mattered to me the most personally, because I'm a journalist, is a chapter on truth. And I think maybe for many people in the room right now, that truth is the most important word for them as well, and the one perhaps that we are most in danger of losing. I'm going to read to you a part of the introduction, the beginning of the chapter on truth. And I'll tell you that though I go into some history and some analysis of the words and the language, I try to tell a story with each word. And quite often the stories I try to tell are personal, about my own life, in order to illustrate where I'm coming from. So here's that chapter. My father was always trying to sort out the facts of complicated issues in order to establish what was true. His formal education, post-high school, provided him with an accountancy diploma that eventually landed him a job in the federal tax department, first in Winnipeg, then later in Ottawa, and finally in London, Ontario. Between work and helping to care for 7 children in a relentlessly chaotic home, my father didn't have much time for reflection. He read bits and bobs of serendipitously discovered material, features in magazines that came with the newspaper, books that he found on sale, publications he would locate at the library when he wasn't helping us in the children's section or finding detective thrillers to share with my mother. But it was all hit and miss, and he had so many questions. The font of wisdom in our house in London was a bookshelf in the TV room. The television set was really the focal point of this faux wood paneled haven, but stashed behind the perpetually opened ironing board and a worn floral chair was the family library. A set of encyclopedias held pride of place, lined up in a single row, their pale gold bindings hinting at the knowledge within. At the top of each spine was a scarlet red banner that read, Funk and Wagnall's Standard Reference Encyclopedia, and a black tab with the alphabetical range of the volume and number from the series, 25 in all. The rest of the book collection was eclectic. It included a giant green-covered atlas of the world that slowly fell apart from use. Pierre Berton's The Last Spike, and Winston Churchill's Their Finest Hour. Some volumes probably belong to my mother, a collection of issues of Reader's Digest, the Mennonite Cookbook, Food That Really Schmecks, manuals on improving your bridge score. But among the books on the shelves were a few curiosities curated by my father's sporadic encounters with literature. An anthology of the lives of popes was placed, probably by accident, next to some books about communism. The Ascent of Man, Tracing Evolution, shared shelf space with the Bible. I have no idea how we came to acquire any of these works except for the encyclopedias. My father purchased the entire set, volume by volume, at the grocery store, buying into a supermarket campaign that offered texts each week for 99 cents. As a marketing strategy, each new volume that appeared meant that a previous one would be taken off the supermarket shelf. A family that failed to shop for food on a given week risked missing out on an edition and then having an incomplete set. My father was determined this was not going to happen to us. Our academic futures depended on him purchasing all of them. Other students might fail to know Shakespeare's date of birth, volume 22, or the history of Colombia, volume 7, because their mums and dads had gone elsewhere for groceries, but never us. And so each week, along with the iceberg lettuce, the canned corn, and discount cold cuts from the store, was another golden-spined volume for our collection. If we approached our parents for insight into any subject, or even with a casual question, my father would head to the Funk and Wagnalls. He'd find the appropriate entry and read it to us. No matter that some of the material was already out of date when the books first appeared at the grocery store. Funk and Wagnalls was our window into a complex, often inscrutable world. As his well-educated children set off one by one into their adult lives, my father had more time to read. Especially after retirement, he always had a stack of books by his chair in the living room, along with the murder mysteries he and my mother both liked. When I returned home for weekends, he would corner me for conversations that could go late into the night. My mother lived in a realm of unshakable certainties. Her faith, her place in society, her marriage, our destinies. But my father was gripped with curiosity. The church proffered divine truth, but left too many of his questions unanswered. And while his faith failed to provide him with all the answers or a system of rational inquiry, so did the secular pursuit of truth. My father loved facts, but he was troubled by contradictions. For example, he had discovered the storied career of Joseph Broz Tito through a feature article in a weekend newspaper supplement written after Tito's death in 1980. He liked what he read and decided Marshal Tito had done great service for Yugoslavia. But my father was also a devout Roman Catholic, and the church regarded communists as evil. How could both things be true? Though pontiffs and commies were bedfellows on our family room bookshelves, he found these conflicting realities discordant. He chafed at my decision to become a journalist, becoming part of a profession that questioned everything. Can't you accept anything on faith? He once asked me. Even as he kept up with cultural trends, growing sideburns, switching from white shirts to chartreuse, sporting wide ties, and flirting with the hippie aesthetic that were in vogue, my father was sometimes troubled by the rapid developments behind the popular fashions. The androgyny of the clothes was funky, but it came with shifts in sexual mores, gender roles, and traditions. He thought it was a good thing that women had careers, but what was that doing to the family? Gay marriage was an affront to God, and birth control pills, he believed, were simply wrong. Yet I went to Catholic school along with kids who came from homes with a dozen or more children and he agreed that having such large families was not always desirable. 7 children were more than enough for him. How to reconcile these things? Throughout the 1980s, my visits home became less frequent. But when we had time together, I realized my father was becoming more oriented toward the church. He was temporarily drawn into evangelical Catholicism, a more zealous version of the doctrine, and he once showed me a book that contained a vinyl recording of people speaking in tongues. It would be too harsh and inaccurate for me to suggest that he was drifting away from the rational, but I could see that in his search for meaning, the facts were letting him down. It wasn't contradiction or Pentecostalism that eventually ended his inquiries, but dementia. The disease oddly quieted his brain. In the years before he died in 2011, my father no longer read, but he seemed more content and cheerful than I'd ever known him. I have no doubt that his faith was a big part of that. He'd simply accepted that there were no complete answers, at least not in this world. But I often think about what would have become of him had his inquiring mind been infected with the virus of present-day disinformation that is influencing so many people. My father would have been a prime target. Instead of searching for answers in a stack of random books, he might have found himself online, scanning websites that masquerade as news, looking to connect the dots, but unwittingly consuming conspiracy theories. What would have become of his quest in an era where truth is so perverted, it's beyond recognition as being true? Perhaps the church would have been his salvation. Some good clergy do attempt to guide their flocks away from secular falsehoods, and his kids could have warned him of the dangers. But I wonder if the trolls and bots that seek to distort so many people's sense of reality would have found my dad. After all, he would have been their prey. So that's the setup into a chapter about the truth, in which I describe the developments and how we may have got to this place through technology, through social media, through the distortions of media, and what that's doing to our perception of the truth and what damage that does to our societies. Because as you know, that without facts, we don't have truth. And I mean truth not in the sense of religious truth, but we don't have truth about our societies. And without that truth, we can't trust each other. And without trust, our societies start to break down. So that's the purpose of that chapter. And we can talk about that. I'm sure you have questions about where we've got to and how that happened. I'm going to just finish with one last section, because I promised people before we came on that I would find something hopeful to give you. I'm not going to give you something hopeful, and that's the point. But I'm going to if you've seen the paperback version, you'll know that I added 2 words at the end of the book in a final chapter called Afterwards. And the 2 words that I've added are hopeful and meaningful. And I want to explain to you how I came to that decision, and I'd love to hear how you respond to that. I began touring for this book while the US election campaign was in full swing. The Canadians who came out to those events were cautiously optimistic that our neighbors to the south would never elect someone whose autocratic ambitions were so obvious. And then Trump won, causing severe post-election shock. After that November 5th vote, people asked the same question everywhere I went. What gives me hope? How can we be hopeful about the future? Wanting to give people some light, I answered the question with vague platitudes, even though the currents in my own book are dark. In my honest moments, I told the truth, which is that nothing going on right now makes me hopeful. By nature, I'm an optimist. My problem with hope is that the word has soured on me. I came to suspect that when people ask me for something hopeful, they wanted to hear that the mess we find ourselves in will soon go away, that we will wake up one morning and find it was all a bad dream. Their hopefulness, it seems to me, was a nostalgic longing for a return to some mythical time when we seemed to be all right. In these times, nostalgia drives the politics of the left and the right. For those on the left, the ideal past is a time when we had functioning safety net that took care of everyone, when the government had a plan for climate change, when we happily accepted diversity and greeted newcomers with open arms. For many on the right, the past they hanker for is a time when society was much simpler. You worked hard and paid your way. All families were like the ones in Little House on the Prairie. Church was important in every community, and those communities were homogenous. Both these visions are mythical. I don't want to go back to the past, idealized or otherwise. Instead, I would like to imagine how to go forward to a future that truly gives everyone a shot at realizing their full potential. That value, more than wealth and acquisition, and that reconnects us with the beleaguered natural world in a way that is respectful and caring. So I began to figure out how I was going to reconcile my lack of hope. And I'm not talking about hope in terms of faith, but hope in ourselves, hope in our societies. And I was at a reading by the American novelist Richard Powers, fascinating man. And he was asked the same question I was getting asked, what gives you hope? And he said the same thing. And so I was startled when he said that he feels that hope is nostalgic. The idea of hope is nostalgic. And he said that what he's decided, that what he matters to him, what he's on the quest to find isn't hope, and not what's hopeful, but what is meaningful. As soon as he said that word, it was a eureka moment for me. And I realized that was the word that I was craving. Meaningful is active and forward-looking, fraught with possibilities. Meaningful gestures reach out, searching for a sense of purpose, for something worthwhile. Hopeful is passive, a wishful thinking approach to our problems. Hopefulness waits for something good to happen. I'm here to tell you that if all we are doing is waiting for something good to happen, it's not going to. Things are as bad as you think they are. But that doesn't mean we have nothing. The future can be better. It can even be wonderful. I began to revisit the words in this book in the context of what was meaningful, starting with the word freedom. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian neurologist, psychologist, and philosopher, he wrote that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance, to choose one's own way. Frankl was a Holocaust survivor who went on to write one of the most important books of our time, Man's Search for Meaning. Even though the book chronicles the most hopeless of all situations that a human being can suffer, existence in Nazi concentration camps, I often return to his slim volume when I need inspiration. Frankl was convinced that those who survived did so because they found meaningfulness. He wrote that despite their circumstances, some people lived with faith in the future through the power of their imaginations, which provided them with both courage and resistance. In Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl tells stories of being shuttled by transport trains from one death camp to another. Even though there was no hope, nothing left to live for, the men in the boxcars would struggle to see out the small air holes whenever they were traveling past something beautiful, like the stunning mountains of Salzburg. As they worked the frozen ground with dull tools, ignoring hunger, disease, and deprivation, the men would sometimes stop long enough to take in the grandeur of the dawn, or even run out of the fetid barracks to witness a spectacular sunset. On rare occasions, prisoners would find the strength to sing songs or tell jokes. They would care for those who were dying. For Frankl, this wasn't about hopefulness. This was the power of goodness. of truth, beauty, and most of all, the capacity to love. You cannot pursue happiness or fulfillment, Frankl concluded. They are naturally occurring qualities in a life that's dedicated to something larger than oneself and in the love of another. And that's all the meaning I can offer you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carol. As it happens, we have some questions. In Lost for Words, you want us to restart a conversation. Is it really a matter of starting again, or is it the same old track leading to the same old destination? Are you really talking about reinventing a different kind of communication or a new language, a different track leading to a different destination?
My feelings about reinvention. I've been exploring this word reinvention, because this book I'm writing now, I'm looking at Canada reinventing itself and how do we reinvent ourselves as a country. And I came to understand that reinvention isn't to make something new. It's to discover what's always been there and to finally be able to see it. And so I think it's the answer to the question is that it's both. It's a matter of seeing what's always been there, to see the answers that have always been there, that are deeper than we might expect them to be. And so in these conversations, these words that we have in our conversations, what I ask people to do is to look at the words more clearly, to understand them more deeply, and to understand the language around us more deeply, and to do what many people called deep listening, to start to not just listen to people, not just be able to have an opportunity to express your views, but to listen deeply, to really penetrate what people are saying and to understand them, not only because we need to in order to survive, but because so often when people are making things up, when we're confronted and bombarded with so many falsehoods and so much misinformation and deliberate disinformation, we need to not react emotionally as we so often do, because that's what they're trying to provoke. We need to deeply listen to what they're saying to understand where they're coming from, where they get this from, and what they're attempting to do with that false information. So I'm asking people to be less emotional with language and bring more wisdom to a conversation.
Sorry for your patience. My mouse was misbehaving. The question here, how do major television and radio networks see their role in truth-telling set against the other social media podcasts that seem to cater to very specific audiences?
Well, media is an interesting animal, mainstream media. What we're getting from so many of blogs or Substacks or programs that we might follow is quite often somebody's interpretation of information, something that's been processed through and reshaped. In many cases, I find that to be quite well done. There's a number of Substacks I follow. There are the blogs I follow. There's some very, very good commentators, some of them hilarious, like John Oliver, who can distill all kinds of information and make it funny and to sort of point out the ironies and the pitfalls of what people are saying. The thing about the media that's the most important that people don't, I think, generally understand. So the most important part of the news business is gathering news. And there are increasingly fewer people doing that. So what you have is a situation where you've got all kinds of people who are commenting and opinionating, opining, crafting other views, putting things together, synthesizing these things. But there's very few people out gathering the news. This is the crucial job of news agencies, the most important job. And it's the one that is diminishing the most quickly because it's the most expensive. And so what you have are fewer and fewer people who are out gathering, going to the courthouse to hear a conclusion of a verdict and to follow a proceeding. You get fewer people going to City Hall or covering things on Parliament Hill. You have fewer people who are able to go to the events, to go to whether it's a conflict overseas or a press conference or to simply to sports events, to school board meetings, all those things that are absolutely crucial to our lives. And so what increasingly is happening is that we have less and less information, real information about what's going on, less and less reporting, and more people commenting on the little bit of reporting we have. And the best of those kind of bloggers or substackers, you'll notice at the end of their programs or their text, they will list their sources. And if you look at it, you'll see there'll be a half dozen, a dozen, even more of news agencies that have supplied them with the information they needed in order to have those informed opinions. And that's the part that we're losing. So when you're listening to the influencers or substackers or whatever, most of it's for free. You can get that online on your phone or whatever. The parts that are the most important are the parts that cost money, and those are behind paywalls for you. So what I have to urge people to do is to subscribe to newspapers, to actually support, especially your local news. If you still have local newspapers, local publications, local radio, TV, the CBC, local, your own versions of it, fight like hell to keep those things. Fight like hell to have those news gatherers, like the people are coming to your school board meetings and your town council meetings and your city events and your sporting events, because the media is now being almost controlled entirely out of Silicon Valley. The big tech companies, they don't give a fig about whether you know what's going on in your community. They don't care if you know what's going on with your water supply or your sewage or why there are potholes or what happened at the school board. They're not going to give that to you. And once you have lost the basic news gatherers in your community, you cannot get them back. They will not come back. And you will have to rely on whatever Mark Zuckerberg or anyone in the world of big tech wants to feed you. And that's the real danger you're faced with.
This question of media, I'm just tipping in a text here so I can read it. So we're going to go deeper into media for the next two questions. So my problem with the media, says one person, is not just whether or not what is reported is factual, but whether it is complete. There is so much news, it seems to me, that is meant to be sensational, spectacle, and even the most insignificant detail can be made sensational. Every ridiculous phrase that passes through certain lips, or a president slipping on an airplane step. These things are not news at all, but the media makes them so. And we're getting to the question. At the same time, things like the blockade of a country is hardly spoken about. So why is it that the news seems to dictate what we care about?
Okay, well, a lot of answers to that. I don't know what you follow, the person who's asked the question, what they follow in the way of news. If you're following on Twitter or Instagram or even on your phone, you might have a steady diet of those gotcha moments, excuse me, when you're dealing with just the flub or the flib. And I think that it's difficult sometimes to sort out what is an important development and what isn't. And I think, I don't know, I follow news agencies, I follow news sites that deliver for me both the slip on the airplane step and tell me what's happening with the blockade. But that's because I go behind paywalls. That's because I subscribe. And so I get a pretty good source stream of information from that. I follow CBC News I online and otherwise. Seems to me there's a fair bit of depth there. If you're looking, I don't know what you're getting, and I'm not going to suggest that the person who's asked the question isn't trying to get beyond those gotcha moments, because I don't know what you follow, but I don't have much difficulty doing it.
Okay, another media-related question. For some years now, gathering facts has required looking at multiple sources, as you said, BBC, CBC, Reuters, Substack, and so on. The semblance of fact does seem to appear, including positive stories exhibiting the abundance of people and global activities, medical discoveries, and so much more. Yet, some are trapped by the bots and social media feeds. Is there a suggestion as to how to guide those trapped in social media disinformation towards, shall we say, a more meaningful information and discussion?
Yeah, turn it off. Get rid of it. I'm not just being flip. I mean, social media, big tech, they make their money from your engagement. The longer you stay on their site, the more money, the more information from you they can scrape out, the more they can know about you for the algorithm they form of you. And then they can feed back to you what that algorithm suggests you want. And so you end up in an echo chamber where everything you are asking big tech to tell you, big tech decides that's what you want to know. And it'll take you down holes. It'll take you down rabbit holes pretty rapidly. We're always within 3 clicks of actually going into a conspiracy theory. That's an actual fact. So the engagement that you have is the way the engagement works, the way it works best for big tech is to engage you emotionally. It draws you into with your emotions. And the most powerful emotions are negative ones, are anger and hate. And so what it does is it draws you in with the stuff that's going to get you the most riled up, because that's the expect. If you want to just get facts and information and to get caught up in something, you don't stay on very long. You get your facts and you leave. But if you are engaging on something at a more emotional level, you hang in there. You keep checking out what they're saying. What does it, and you're reacting to that. And that's what they need you to do. That's what they want you to do, because that keeps you on, and that's how they make money. I would say what you do is deny them the ability to make money by not being on. And having said that, it's not just your responsibility. There's a huge responsibility to regulate big tech that is not happening. And there's efforts to do it. It was already well advanced that there were really important efforts at regulating big tech and what information it could take from your life, how it could influence you, just what kind of information was on, how accurate it had to be, how much trouble they would get into if they were not monitoring false information. We were well on track to develop some really good walls for that, some really good ways of protecting ourselves with national and international regulations. What's happened now with the Trump administration is that the White House is in bed with big tech, that they have a very, very close relationship. And a lot of those developments that we were seeing have now evaporated, or at least they've been put on hold. In Canada, we were developing something, and I think that Mark Carney has picked up on it, called digital sovereignty, where we're going to attempt and talk about defense sovereignty and economic sovereignty. There's something called digital sovereignty, where we have control over what information is coming into the country, and we have control over how much information about you those big tech companies can take out, can extract from you while you're on. But right now, they have a tremendous amount of knowledge about you simply because we all stay far too engaged with the mostly shit that they're feeding us.
Staying with your role as a journalist, how can people such as journalists, media, or others who bring people together for conversation frame, guide, encourage, or lead those conversations in ways that participants or guests can listen deeply, to use your phrase, to each other, instead of a discourse where participants try to win or score points in the conversation?
Well, we don't have many places where we can do that. And I'm not sure to what degree it's the job of media to do that. I think the job of media, I think the most important job, as I said, is news gathering, which I think is being diminished because of costs. Then there is another layer where there are more debates and conversations in television and radio, show As It Happens, or some of the power and politics or whatever, you get a bit more depth with those, not a huge amount of depth. But you're not going to get that for the most part from your news agencies. Where those conversations, where that depth has to happen is in your own communities. And where it has to happen is in the sessions like this one, where we engage with each other. And we're going to spend more than an hour together talking. These are where it really happens. It's on the grassroots level that real engagement is happening, the real conversations are occurring. And so it's a matter of creating far more and more of those places where we can do that, just forums and gatherings and encounters. There's a bunch of stuff going on in the United States that's really fascinating with what they're called bridge building organizations. And it's happening here in Canada. There's one called Rural for Rural, I think. And it's something that's just started up where there are trying to bring people who are on different sides of issues, bring them together and discuss things for an afternoon over potluck dinner. And huge numbers of people are showing up at these events. And so I think that it's not, the media can do something, can only do so much. Where it has to happen is within our own communities. And the other place where it has to happen is at the dinner table. It has to happen in your home. It has to happen with your families, because the thing that scares me the most is the degree to which young people have no opportunity to hear different views. Because in school now, as you may know, it's increasingly it's rare to allow a debate of any kind, because somebody might get offended. You have to be careful of everything that's said, and so. When I was growing up, we had debates all the time. There were people expressed views and they disagreed with each other, not just at school, but at home. In my family, with 7 kids, we were disagreeing all the time, and we could test our ideas. Now, increasingly, we see both at school and in homes is that we don't want to have any fights at dinner. We don't want to have any discussions. Easter supper, we're all going to get together, and Grandma says, keep the politics at home. We don't want to talk about that stuff. We don't want it here. Well, to some extent, yeah, you don't want it to turn into just another big political brawl. But I think that allowing for conversations to happen where people disagree is really helpful for kids who are listening and hearing how adults test their ideas and challenge each other and come to new ideas. And so, and allowing them to express their views and have their views tested. And to learn how to make an argument and to actually defend it. So I worry about the degree to which we think the media or the schools should be developing these things when it should be happening in our own communities and our homes.
Here's a very direct question about your experience as a journalist and a presenter. Have you ever succeeded in calling an aggressive speaker to be respectful, and how have you managed that?
I'm trying to think of occasions. I never really thought that was my job. If people were being belligerent with, well, I mean, I had one. Different people remember Evel Knievel. The worst interview in my entire life was Evel Knievel. He was so abusive. It was so misogynist and awful and ugly. I had never encountered anything like it before. And I was stunned. I had absolutely no idea how to engage him. And my job is to engage people. That's what I do, no matter how belligerent or awful they are. That was the only time I just gave up and said, I can't take this anywhere. But I've talked to warlords. I've talked to people who are running genocides. I've talked to people who are just in all kinds of things, and it's my job to challenge them really thoroughly and to really make them defend what they're doing and to expose them when I can. But my job isn't to school them in their belligerence, because they're not going to stop if I tell them to, and because I'm serving people who are listening or reading, and I'm not serving myself.
In a conversation, people often make statements. It's not a question. So here's a statement. It says, this is just a comment, really, and it's not a question. But in addition to news gathering, there's also an important role for robust analysis. I think there are some important sources on Substack, for instance, like Heather Cox Richardson, Paul Krugman, Timothy Snyder, and many former mainstream journalists. But the challenge for many people is probably identifying who are truly legitimate, deeply knowledgeable sources.
And the ones you mentioned, Timothy Snyder and Sarah Cox Richardson, the other ones that are ones I follow very closely. And so because it is really informed, it's very intelligent and informed. And the way you know, it's very simple. You scroll to the end of what they're doing and find out what their sources are. They'll always tell you their sources. And Sarah Cox Richardson's, I mean, half of her posting is her analysis, her incredible ability to synthesize huge amounts of information and make it so clear. But she will list a dozen sources of that, all the newspapers that she reads that, I mean, most of us can't afford to subscribe to the numbers of publications she does. She makes a lot of money now, so I think she can. But Timothy Snyder is the same. I mean, these people are, it's so the way you discern whether it's reliable information is, for my money, it's entirely based on what their sources are. And if they don't tell me their sources, then I don't trust them.
I want to move away for a moment from journalists and sources with this question. We began this session with a land acknowledgement. How would you understand the importance of reconciliation and dialogue between Indigenous and settler cultures in creating a path to rebuild Canadian society in ways that honor truth and meaning and caring?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. And we don't have to wander from what we're talking about, because I think what the truth and reconciliation, what we so often don't return to is truth, and getting at the truth of what happened, and the truth of deep truth and deep listening to that truth. Where absolutely reconciliation is paramount, and the recommendations, the calls to action are absolutely must all of them be implemented. But we have to keep listening and keep deeply listening to the stories and to the impact of the settler culture, to understand as deeply as we can the truth. And I think that, and I get into this a lot in the new book that I'm writing, is that unless Canada can get to that place, unless we can reconcile and find that truth and reconciliation, we're no better than the United States. And we can pride ourselves, we can think that we're nice and good people, and that we're not like them, and that's what distinguishes us. But until we have figured out how to do that, until we have actually engaged and done as much as we can to turn that around, and also not just truth and reconciliation, until we would come to terms with the systemic racism that is part of so many of our institutions, until we've addressed those things, we can't lay claim to this idea that Canadians are these nice, good people. We're not like the Americans. Not entirely. We still have a lot of work to do.
Well, let's talk about a different, excuse me, a different call to action. You ask in your book that we become citizens who contribute, not serfs who labor, and not customers who bargain. The nots are very straightforward: not a serf, not a bargain hunter. But what about that first issue, citizens who contribute? Can you tell us more about these kinds of citizens?
Well, hopefully the ones I'm speaking to are those kinds of citizens. I'm assuming you are, because I don't think you'd be in this room with us if you weren't those kinds of citizens who want to build a society, that want to create a world in which is better than. That's why I say that hopefulness for me, the idea that we would just wake up one morning and everything could go back to the way it was, and that some of the worst things are over. I don't want to return to it. I think that what we need is to move forward, and to, as citizens, to be more inclusive, to look for more ways that we can include more people. And so that what we do, my objective is to build a society that doesn't make people equal, doesn't force you to be equal, because we'll always have inequalities, but to give everybody an equal opportunity to realize their full potential. And that's, I think, job one in that citizenry. So that's why taxes are important. That's why engagement is important. That's why schools are important. All those things, in order to give every single person who lives in this country an opportunity to realize their full potential, in which we will benefit from that. That societies, the reason why I'm hopeful, and I'm hopeful, they just say that, the reason why I'm optimistic, because I'm an eternal optimist, is that we are social animals. We survive. Our exoskeleton is society. It's coming together and working together, because I guess we can survive as individuals, but we can never thrive. And so the only way we're going to actually build a society is by coming together, by bridging these differences. And I think it's why when I wrote this book, it really looked bleak for not just the United States, but I felt that we were heading down the same hole. I thought that Canada was becoming so divisive, and I wrote it during the time of the as you people know far more than me, the occupation of Ottawa with the truckers convoy, and there was just so much anger and so much division everywhere in the country, and I felt quite despairing. I don't feel that despair now. I am seeing Canada change so quickly and so rapidly as we realize we do not want to be like the Americans. We don't want to go in that direction. And I'm just seeing increasingly a society that wants to build something better, and not just build electric cars or build jets and war machinery, but build our communities, build understanding. And I really see it almost everywhere, a growing sense of that.
A phrase we hear often is people should stick to their own lane. Ethicists stick to ethics, lawyers to the law, philosophers to their first principles, theologians to theology. The issues in your book spill over with implications all over the place. When people of faith add their perspective, they are often told by secularists to butt out. Does using religious language in any way just complicate things?
Okay, I'm not really sure. It depends on what you mean by that. I think people, I just read a section in which I talked about my father and his faith, and how that served him and when that didn't serve him. And so I don't feel for a moment hesitant to talk about it in those terms. But I think that it's worrisome when what's going on in the United States is really important in terms of religion and the role religion is playing, because Christianity is being perverted by a section of the political world down there, where they've turned into Christian nationalism, where you decide that there's some kind of white Christian patriarchy that should take precedence, and you'll hear so many Christians who say, no, this is so wrong. This is, I mean, how many times now do we refer to Jesus and the teachings of Jesus and say that this is everything. Every time these people talk about that they're doing things in the name of Christianity, I mean, you're hearing this whole war in Iran is in the interest of Christianity. I mean, it's just nothing could be more ridiculous for anybody who follows the teachings of Jesus, whether you're a Christian in the sense of being a church-going Christian, or just somebody who believes in the truth. I mean, the Christianity of Jesus Christ does not give permission to anyone to do the kinds of things that are going on by ICE rounding up people and dragging them off streets, or bombing people in another country. I mean, I'm sorry, it's if that's how you can defend it is in terms of religion, then that's not how religious language should be used. But there are certainly ways it can be used.
This next question is about language. You've added 2 new words, hopeful and meaningful, to the book. What are some of the other words that you would like to add?
I think that if I were to write another volume, which I'm not, I think I would talk about reconciliation and how misused it is, that somehow there's an idea that we've reconciled and we haven't. I think I would look really deeply at the word reconciliation. I think I would look at the word queer, which I think has been stolen from queer people and turned into something ugly again, just when they thought that they had liberated it and owned it. And so I would look at the word queer. I think feminism, that as a term, is now being demonized, and I would like to reclaim that. So those are 3 examples I can think of.
Well, let's stick with the last one. You said you would like to reclaim. Let's stick with feminism. How might someone go about reclaiming feminism?
Well, I think that it's being turned into something that's bad, right? I mean, especially what we just finished talking about, this Christian nationalist movement in the States that is very much, I mean, in their writing, I mean, I follow it very closely and read what they have to say quite often. And the view is that women are subordinates. They should not be in the workplace. We're hearing that J.D. Vance, the vice president of the country, believes that. You hear that from some leading members of the MAGA movement. You heard that from the people involved in Turning Point USA, that the role of women is to stay home. The role of women is and that there is returning things to a very, very male-dominated patriarchy. And I don't think that that's what that most of us want in this society. So, yeah, I think that feminism as a movement has to be reclaimed.
This next question talks about safety, or asks about safety. It seems that speaking up publicly runs the risk of becoming a target on social media, which perhaps one can ignore, but also actual threats from individuals that would cause a person to be concerned. I thank you and others for speaking up. Our faith tells us that speaking up for the truth has been linked to persecution. Here's the question. What are your thoughts about how we balance speaking up with personal safety?
Well, I'm president or co-president of Canadian Journalists of Free Expression, and we are constantly trying to help our colleagues, the Canadian journalists who are threatened with really dire things because of their coverage and because of their reporting. It's an extremely dangerous world for them. I can't tell you how many people are actually having to face down physical threats to themselves and to their kids. They're being doxxed. It's really ugly. And how do we defend them? How do we defend people who are trying to report and still face that? And that's where regulation comes in. We have a piece of legislation called the Online Harms Bill, and it's about what harm is done to people who are public figures who are online, not just journalists, but people who are in all areas of public life, including politicians. And the Online Harms Bill is being attacked by the U.S. government, by the White House, as being one of those things that censors the free speech, because the people in Silicon Valley, the people in the big tech companies, have made it clear that Washington needs to treat that as a non-tariff trade barrier, to treat that as an obstacle to them and their ability to have customers and to exchange information. They are doing nothing to help the situation. They're supposed to be. There are laws in place that they're supposed to be protecting people, and they don't. So we need to see the Canadian government has been trying to do something about it. But it's extremely difficult. We've just met with huge resistance by people in Silicon Valley.
Here's someone formerly from Winnipeg, wanting to know more about reinvention and optimism. Our book club had one of our best meetings when your book was on the agenda, and the best discussion ever was on taxes. And we were hoping for a follow-up book, and you've told us that there is. So can you please tell us something about reinvention?
Well, yeah, this reinvention is just, I just finished actually writing that sentence before I joined you. The reinvention is not when you make something new, it's when you see what's always been there. And so what I say in this new book is that as we try and reinvent ourselves as a country, because I think what happened when Donald Trump announced that question whether we should exist and why do we exist, we had to really ourselves as Canadians answer the questions like, why do we exist? What is Canada? Why do we have a different country? What's the argument we give to Donald Trump, but also to anybody who thinks that they can walk in here? Why do we exist? What matters to us? And so we've had to really work hard at coming to understand what is the Canadian, what are the values we have? And so this new book is about those values, where they come from, and goes, believe it or not, it starts in Winnipeg and starts with a teacher I had in grade 4, Mrs. Barchuk, who taught us about patriotism and how to love this country and why we should. And it goes from that moment in grade 4 to the time I'm in now, when I think we are in the best place we've ever been in this country to start to understand why we exist and to reinvent ourselves in the way of seeing what's always been there, what we've always had. It's like that scene in The Wizard of Oz at the end when Gilda says, "My dear, you've always had the power to go home." And actually, I should write that into the book. And I think that's it. We've always had the power to be separate from the United States. We've always had the power to invent ourselves as something meaningful and grand and caring and purposeful. And now we have that opportunity to make it happen. And so that's where I am at this moment. So I hope that, and the book, by the way, the book is called True Patriot Love.
Well, we know all good stories have a Winnipeg connection. So that's, I want to conclude our conversation with you by turning the tables a little bit. You've spent your career asking thousands of questions to thousands of people, and we've been pushing our questions to you for the last short while. What are the questions you might have for us today?
Why do you do what you do? Why did you give up your Sunday afternoon to be here? Why did you, all of you who are on the masthead here I'm looking at, why have you volunteered? Why do you care?
I think answering perhaps as showing up is the statement.
Yeah. But why do you show up? Why does it matter? Why does this matter to you to be here right now?
When I started thinking about today's session, I was very concerned about the sort of intensity and the harshness of so much of the content of the book. And what is a discovery in hearing the questions and comments that were made, and very centrally the way you speak about them, there is an elegant lightness surrounding it. These issues are profoundly complicated and difficult and heavy, but your approach is gentle, incisive, certainly not romantic, certainly not sentimental, but it is very encouraging, as hard as so much of your content is. And you've spent a lifetime dealing with difficult subject matters. You have never taken in your work that easy route. And what we hear today is an encouragement to, no matter how difficult it might be and how distressed and discomforted we might be, there is something called you certainly wouldn't call it hope, because that's not your word. But there is something meaningful and profoundly meaningful about hearing somebody present in a coherent, inviting way to engage in issues that are life transforming and dangerous.
Well, we can only conclude with what I said by Viktor Frankl, and I urge everyone to read Man's Search for Meaning. And what he said, I read this is, you cannot pursue happiness or fulfillment. They are naturally occurring qualities in a life that's dedicated to something larger than oneself and in the love of another.
And just popped up in the question box, it's a comment box, is it matters to be here because we seek the most articulate way to answer that question of why. Now,
well done.
I turn the microphone on for Terry Tunney, who has a few words for you. Terry, over to you.
And you've said some wonderful words, Kevin, that really sum up a thank you. But I would like to thank you, Carol. We've missed being able to depend on you to understand the important issues and events every weeknight at 6:30. We turned into conversations for years, and then you were gone. You disappeared. But when your book came out, at a time of real polarization and concern for us here in Canada, it was a trusted friend come back to help us put things in perspective, to challenge us, to articulate our increasing anxiety. And we were so happy to welcome you back. One of the things that strikes me about, the conversation is that you admitted that there were some dire predictions. And, you said it was before the election and you hoped they never came true, but we saw them come true. And, this has been part of the distressing part of the last couple of years. We have just seen it, just follow the path that you laid out. And I suppose, as we've listened to this conversation, I'm so pleased that you said that you have seen this as a really strong time for Canada, that Canada has changed. It's, and your new book is going to talk about, building something, something better. And you see this is where we're going. And I find that, you're not using that word hopeful, but it's certainly meaningful and it's optimistic. We're delighted to see your optimism, because I think, underneath it all, we are optimistic. That's one of the reasons we're here. We don't want things to be the way they are. We are optimistic. Our conversation this afternoon has highlighted some of the things we've always admired in you, Carol: your warmth, your honesty, courage, the breadth of your vision, and the clarity of your understanding. I believe you epitomize what is best to journalism. And it's been a pleasure, a privilege to have you lead our conversation for Times this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry. It was lovely.
Now to Elizabeth Elliott.
Thank you. Well, Carol, wonderful afternoon, really. As host of Conversations for Our Times, it's an honor for me to present you with a token of thanks. Now we've got it. This is a hand-beaded brooch representing Turtle Island, which is the term many Indigenous people call North and Central America. We commissioned it from a young First Nations woman who lives on Manitoulin Island. So we're going to send this along to you, along with a small honorarium. I want to offer my thanks to you and everyone that was here this afternoon I didn't want to use the word meaningful conversation, but it was really meaningful and very substantial. We dealt with things that really mean a lot to us, and that's why I use the word substantial. Now, our next conversation for our times will be sometime this spring. We're working on the final details, and we'll let you know as soon as everything is ready to be announced. So thanks to Carol, to our team who put this together, and for everyone who came out on a Sunday afternoon for a very meaningful, substantial conversation. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.